right, listen up.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. This is the 440th VFW Podcast. I'm Tyrant, and with me again is Zeus. How you doing today, Zeus?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Good. So this is great. Always love having the people on the show. Obviously, you've been on before. Super fun conversations with you.
I keep inviting you back.
Oh well, it's your podcast too. So. Yeah, but I think so. I have an idea of what we can talk about today. So I think people have sort of picked this up. We've mentioned it before, which is the point is to have a fun conversation about flying BMS. But I have kind of a general vague storyline in mind. I mean, we might jump off it once in a while. We've talked about this, Zeus, you and I, and Dirk have. But the sort of the notion that we started out with our first episode was sort of, well, hey, we're making a wing, and here's why you might want to join. And then we kind of moved through, people coming on board, and we talked about mission planning. So we've got this sort of general chronological, arc of what it means to fly missions, multiplayer missions especially, in BMS. And so that brings us to the thing I thought we might talk about today, which is the briefing. And now that can mean a couple things. We certainly use it to mean more than one thing. It can mean the sort of the mission briefing, the stuff we do before a mission to communicate information to pilots. And it can also mean what we call the flight briefing, where we're actually in TeamSpeak. We're about to, jump into the virtual jets and go. But I think all of that is kind of a logical next step. And I thought it'd be great to talk to you today about it. Because I always have enjoyed your briefing material. I think you're good at conducting them. You know a lot about them. But that's the general idea. So I don't know. Maybe we'll just jump in there. I know, Zeus, you and I have talked before about this topic, but maybe I'll just sort of throw it over to you and we can wander through the topic as we see fit.
Sounds like a plan. Ad hoc, but a plan. So the briefing materials, or I guess briefings in general, before we get into the materials, definitely different between what you do in a single player versus a multiplayer. So for those of you that haven't joined a multiplayer wing and are looking for it, one of the things that you'll find, hopefully, that brings you back to that wing over and over again, are the briefings that take place. It's very different than flying a single player. Most wings do some flavor of going through, looking at the 2D map together, picking out targets, creating some sort of prioritization or some sort of structure, then actually fragging your flights in the ATO, and then going out and flying them. So at the 440th, we've got a good group of mission makers, and this does kind of tie into the mission making as well. Mission planners will actually put together briefing materials. They usually try to get it out 3-4 days before the actual flight, so that pilots have a chance to read through the material. Typically, it would contain information about general things going on within the theater of operations, and specifically, what is it that the mission planner, a mission maker, is looking to achieve? What are your goals for the mission? And from the mission, it breaks down into potentially package objectives and then down into flight objectives. And that's something that's definitely different than playing in single player. It's really hard to brief the AI. They don't listen anyway. So this is something that's I think is a lot of fun, and it really adds, I think, to the overall engagement and realism factor, the immersion factor, if you will, that brings a lot of us to BMS. I mean, it's a very realistic simulation of an F-16, and I think the briefing can add to that immersion by getting you involved with your fellow virtual pilots, and really is one of the things that makes what we do at the 440th, or what brought this group of people together, work so well, and that's the collaborative nature of, hey, we are planning a mission. We're not just hopping in the jet and going. We actually sit down and usually a couple days ahead of time, hand out, like I said, briefing materials, gives you some overview, and then spend, probably around 30 minutes, hopefully not too much more than that, before we actually jump into the pit, going over that material, clarifying any questions, and then we break up into our flights, and flight leads will assign specifics, and then right before we commit, we pull together one last time as a package or a set of packages, go through any last-minute coordination pieces, and then hopefully go up and have a successful mission, and one that's enjoyable and one that really makes you feel like you've pulled together. And 9 times out of 10, if your briefing is well, it goes well, and you've thought things through, and you've come up with contingency plans, it makes for a better flight. You know, they say that no plan survives contact in battle, but it's nice to have those and things to fall back on. And I think for me anyway, it certainly adds to the realism and the enjoyment that I get out of the simulation.
Yeah, the corollary to that one is those who fail to plan to fail, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So this is, you mentioned the fact that this is something that is unique to multiplayer, and I think that's definitely true. And I think you gave a great overview. I will say that I noticed I don't really do much solo flying anymore. I really have enjoyed the multiplayer aspect so much that I don't get drawn to the sim too much. Sometimes I'll practice something, but
sure,
like a whole mission, I would typically say, hey, I'll just grab somebody, right? Like that's why we're together.
Right.
But I will say that, on the occasions where I have done solo missions, I actually find that, the skills and, the steps that we go through when we do the planning are they actually translate well to single player as well. So hopefully, those of you that aren't, currently involved in multiplayer, although as we've mentioned before, we'd love to have you come join us, we'll find something beneficial here too in terms of, what to look out for, and maybe it's some inspiration to sit down with a pencil for 5 minutes or whatever before your next solo flight and do some of the things that we do for multiplayer.
That's a really good point, and I think you're absolutely right. I think the discipline of going through a briefing, whether it's with an online group or even if you're just going to do a somewhat serious flight on your own. I mean, if you're just hopping in the pit and going up and need to take out some frustrations and shoot down something, have at it, right?
Yep.
But if you're actually trying to go out and have a successful mission, I think these things, like you mentioned, can absolutely play benefit even in the single player world. And essentially, it's sitting down, like you said, just a few minutes with pencil and paper, looking at that 2D map, and doing a target assessment. What do you need to actually get your mission done, right? What type of target are you hitting? Help figure out what your ordnance is. And in single player mode, you've pretty much got your choice of whatever ordnance you want to carry, assuming the campaign has it in stock. If it's a TE, then obviously you've got pretty much anything you want. With some of ours, sometimes the mission planners will put limitations on what you can carry. Maybe supplies are low, and they'll say, hey, you don't have GPS guided ordnance. And it could be part of the exercises just to see how well pilots are able to put unguided munitions on target. And from there, now that you've picked your ordnance, and you've thought about things like collateral damage and any other special constraints that you have, now it's looking at threat assessment, right? What do you have to avoid? And that also may play into weapon selection. Do you need to stay up high because the area is heavily guarded by AAA or man pads or worse, right? Do you need some standoff? Or is this an opportunity potentially to go in extremely low and use things like Mark 82 Snake Eyes or something that's going to allow a low-level delivery, or potentially a different tactic for going at the target? Is it a loft delivery or some sort of pop-up profile or things like that?
Yeah. I wonder if maybe we could kind of zoom in a bit, right, on each of these steps, and maybe use an example. So we could use, you and I flew together with some of the other guys in a fun mission yesterday. We could use that one, or we could use your most recent. You run a regular Friday night flight that I've enjoyed dozens and dozens of times. We could pick one of those. I don't know. What do you think? Should we just like pick a mission and then sort of start walking through these pieces?
We can do that.
Okay. Well, what would you like to choose?
Well, actually, I happen to be sitting here looking at the Friday night campaign, starting to plan out next week's mission. So,
great.
That works for you. We can do that.
So right. So let's just frame it very, very briefly. So this is a campaign. This is something that not every mission we do at the 440th is campaign, but we certainly do some of them. And we've done some long running ones. You and I have both run
definitely year-long.
Yeah, right, year-long or more in some cases. Campaigns where we play the thing through from beginning to end, and I think you do the same thing I do, which is between missions you'll run the clock for a few hours just so that the situation kind of changes a little bit more week to week. But really, you're really in the whole entire. You're probably doing what I would say 2-3 sorties a day throughout every day, at least every day of the campaign front to back.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So maybe you can just give us a very quick overview of where this particular campaign is at, and then launch into what we would expect. So I'm the participant pilot. I'm going to walk up to our message board where you're announcing this mission, and you're going to tell me what I'm going to see, if that makes sense.
Sure. We'll take last week's flight, and we'll kind of walk through that. So in this particular ongoing campaign, like Tyrant said, not all of them are ongoing campaigns, but this one is. So there is a sort of a canned story already going along with it, and this happens to be the Iron Fortress campaign that's included with BMS. And we're in day one, or we're actually getting into the early evening hours of day one in the campaign. This one we started a few weeks ago, and about our fourth or fifth mission in the flight. So we've taken out the nearest surface-to-air threats. These are the kinds of things that would be included in a briefing. That things like due to previous missions, surface-to-air threats south of the DMZ have been eliminated. Your task this week is. And for this last week, we were after Mandumi Airbase and a series of bridges near that airbase to sort of isolate it and prevent further DPRK troops from heading south. So,
sorry, I want to jump in real quick because this just reminded me of something, which is, we talk a lot in this particular hobby about immersion. It's a big word, right? Like, feeling like you're doing the most fun parts of the activity that we're simulating, right? Like, I don't, personally, I'm not interested in experiencing 9Gs here in my basement office. I think it'd be fun once in a while, but not maybe as a...
It would hurt after a while.
Exactly. No longer a young man myself. Anyway, but I think, what's interesting is you started to outline what I've always thought of as the storytelling part of the briefing. And it points out to me something that maybe I haven't thought about before, which is that the immersion aspect, the part where I'm beginning my attack run or whatever, actually starts with that, right? It starts with, because I've done it too, right? Where it's like, okay, well, I know we need to hit this airbase, but, you as a mission maker, sometimes, right? Sometimes it's the straight strategic one, but sometimes there's a little bit of, a little bit of storytelling to it. Like you might say at the end of the last Korean campaign that I ran, I think you actually missed the last mission, unfortunately, but like I was saying, oh yeah, elements of the first are advancing and the leaders of the DPRK are meeting, in this, building. They're, can't get out of the city because of the strategic situation, blah, 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 blah. Just kind of give it a little more, story to it. So it occurs to me that the immersion factor actually starts right there. Absolutely.
And that's the type of thing that, typically a mission planner would include in any briefing material ahead of time. And so if we're talking about planned missions. Those are the things that go into it. Specific loadouts or loadout limitations may also be discussed. So in this case, we were saying we didn't have any loadout limitations per se, although we said, look, we're trying to take out specifically the runway or these bridges, and so that starts to narrow down your weapon choices. Mission planners may even include some recommended loadouts. But this is where, as a part of the briefing, where you actually are sitting down with your fellow V pilots, sit down and you take that 5 minutes and start reconning your target and looking at what am I actually hitting. Let's make sure I'm taking the right ordnance. And there's several tools out there that can help with that. There's lots of different documentation on, what are these weapons designed to do, starting with the TAC ref just inside of BMS. You don't want to be taking a cluster munition onto a hard target, something like a runway or a nuclear processing plant. A cluster munition isn't the right choice there. So sitting down and looking at what are we trying to accomplish, either what are we trying to destroy and what are we potentially trying not to hit if you've got collateral damage, things that you need to be concerned with. And so sitting down in that briefing, walking through the targets, looking at your direction of flight, starting to assess the surface to air threats. And a lot of times a flight lead may even break those responsibilities up because there's a lot of stuff going on, and we don't have days to plan missions. It may take the mission planner a couple of days to actually build up a mission, but let's face it, this is a weeknight or weekend kind of hobby for most of us, and we don't have the luxury of spending 8, 10, 12 hours sitting in a mission planning room on a regular basis and figuring all this stuff out. So we take some shortcuts, and a flight lead may say when you get into the 2D map, he may ask, if it's a 4-ship, say, okay, number 2, why don't you search for the or prepare a little assessment of the air threats. Where are the fighters potentially coming from? What direction? What are we likely to encounter? And while 2 is going off to do that, he'll have 3 scan the area for surface to air threats. What can you see on the 2D map? And depending on the level of I think the feature now is called the Fog of War within BMS. You may or may not see a lot of information. Sometimes it'll tell you in the briefing screen about threats that are in the area. Sometimes you can pick them up on the map. Sometimes you remember from previous flights that, hey, wait a minute, there was some AAA in this area. It's not showing up. We might need to think about that, and so on. So you essentially it gets the entire flight involved in helping pull something together and looking at the various aspects of what's going on, and the flight lead can then kind of coordinate those efforts and maximize the effectiveness of the team in a very short period of time by divvying up those responsibilities. And I think that really helps.
Yeah, it does. There is a lot to do, as you say. I mean, so just to review, so, here I was, let's say your Friday night mission, and by Tuesday you've posted the briefing. I'm like, oh, okay. I see we're attacking Mandumi. I see that we're going after the bridges and the runway itself. Okay. I see that there are, 2 flights, I guess, 1 for each of those targets.
Yep.
I would be deciding at that point which flight I am most likely to want to participate, signing up for a seat, reading whatever else you've put there about weapons restrictions or, that type of thing. And then now now it's Friday night and we're all getting together on TeamSpeak, and I guess we didn't really draw a clear line there, but I guess we can back up a little bit, because
sure.
It feels like the first thing that we try to do, it doesn't feel like it. The first thing that we try to do is you would come on as the mission creator in this case and say, okay, here is the, mission
high
briefing.
level.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really just should at this point, unless there's any kind of surprise information, which sometimes people like to do, should really be a reiteration of what was available in the material beforehand, right?
Yep, just glossing over it, making sure if anybody has any specific questions that may have been left off from the briefing, and hopefully that takes 2 to 3 minutes tops, just lay of the land kind of thing.
Right. So then, right, like you say, that's pretty quick, and typically that would be flight leads speaking up, because when we have 8 or more people, we have to be conscious of communications.
Exactly.
But if anybody does have a question, they, would speak up at that point. So then we were talking, so that makes sense. We did that. And then we break up into flights, which is really, I think, the part that we kind of focus on, because it is, as a participating pilot, that's where I'm getting, I want to know the general situation. I want to know that, Viper flight has air cover. I want to know that the call sign for the seed flight, or not the call sign, but rather the code for the seed flight when they take down the SA-2 is, whatever code word they've decided on, get all the communication stuff. But as you say, that's a small portion. Now we're in the flight briefing, which is the part I think we were.
That's a good point. Yep, I kind of skipped over that. We've left the general briefing room. We've now gone into our flight briefings, and each flight is off planning the specifics of their own task. So you're absolutely right, Tyrant. We started out with the high level overview. This is our mission. May include 1 or more packages. Each package may contain 1 or more flights. Everyone is clear on what their assignments are at a high level. Now we break it down into the individual flight channels, and that's where flight leads may divvy up those responsibilities depending on the complexity of the mission. Or if it's pretty straightforward, like last Friday night wasn't all that much. We did identify a couple of air bases where fighters were based out of, and we said, okay, this is roughly where we think the threats are going to come from. And everyone's just kind of taking notes on that. If there's any coordination in terms of time on target or sequencing that needs to take place, those sorts of things are worked out. Occasionally, different flights will holler out for each other as we're in our briefing rooms, just checking in, making sure, hey, according to the briefing, you're supposed to be there at 10:40. Are you guys still planning on that, or has anything changed? Okay, nope, that's good, great. So everybody continues their planning. And then specific target assignments. So the individual flights, in this case, let's take the Mandumi Air Base. That flight lead sat down and decided, all right, what are the targets we're going to hit? Is it these runway segments? Were there other strategic assets at the airbase that needed to be taken out? Fuel tanks, ammo dumps, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so those are divvied up among the individual pilots in the flight.
For example, maybe if it was just you and me, we would say, okay, well, we really need to take out this runway. We're going to do Durandals because A, it's the best weapon, and B, super fun.
Yeah.
Right. Love a good
Something
Durandal
about
run.
Being 500 feet off the ground doing 500 knots, right?
Yep, nothing wrong with that. Obviously we wouldn't do it if we thought there was a serious, SA-8 threat or something at the airbase.
Right.
But assuming conditions warrant, you'd be like, okay, Tyrant, I'm flight lead, you're number 2 guy. What we're going to do is we're going to go in and, I forget if Mandumi is a 1 or 2 airstrip runway, airbase.
So one strip, and a fairly long one. So we may divvy it up and say, all right, flight lead is going to take the northern half of the runway. Wingman will take the southern half of the runway, and string out your Durandals accordingly. Right. And then we'll coordinate spacing and timing. You either want to make sure that you're really tight together on that flight, or spaced out enough so that the Durandals have a chance to impact and explode, which then tend to throw things up in the air. And you want that settling back down before the second flight comes in, or, like I said, either that or tightly spaced, so that you're both getting your weapons off almost simultaneously and you're not flying into each other's debris.
Right. And then coordinating things like, okay, when we come off the target, we're going to come off left and stay low for 2 miles and then, come back, that type of thing, right?
Right, to avoid those specific threats, whether it be AAA or maybe there is a SAM umbrella that you're underneath and you want to stay under it for a few miles until you can safely escape its weapons engagement zone. this is where reconning that map to find out, where are these things? Do you want to come off left or right? Does it matter? Do you go high right away? Do you stay low? Those are the things you talk about within your flight briefing. And then ultimately, once you've decided your tactics, the weapons that you've used, flight leads will go through just a quick briefing within their flight to make sure that everyone understands the general game plan. Everything from what time are we hitting the pit, what time do we want people checking in?
Actually, this is one of those really fun parts, really immersive parts of it. Would you mind, I don't know if you have enough written down to do this off the top of your head, but I know you've done hundreds of them, so maybe you can pull it off. Would you mind just running through one of those? I just think they sound really cool, and it would illustrate exactly the points you're talking about.
Sure. Let's see if I may have my notes from last Friday. I don't, but I can probably make it up. So my briefing's kind of a summary briefing for any flight that I lead. Typically goes something like this. Start off with our call sign. Today we are Red Tail 1, and we'll be using uniform frequencies 15 for tower, 6 for our standard TAC. We'll use uniform 12 anytime we're operating on the tanker. And for our flight, we'll be using a backup preset frequency to check in once we're in the pit of backup 3. We'll be using Victor 3 for all of our VHF communications, and our yardstick will be 7-6 Yankee. And that's what other pilots in the flight will use to keep their distance or know what their distance is between themselves and flight lead using air-to-air TACAN. Moving down the list, I typically go into laser codes, making sure, especially with the last few releases of BMS, laser codes are important, so we make sure that we've got our laser codes identified, 1521 through 1524, respectively, within the flight. Joker and bingo settings. Try to keep those somewhat realistic. Might be a Joker 5.5, bingo 4.5, depending on how far away we are from getting refuel. Then I run through the pit times. We plan to be in the pit. Typically BMS drops you in 20 minutes before your takeoff, but we just confirm that. Sometimes we may have a short clock. What time are we going to check in up front? Typically give people about 5 minutes to get things squared away, and we do a pre-briefed upfront control check-in. And then what is our expected taxi time and takeoff time. And all that's important to pilots because they need to make sure that they're getting through their ramp start checklists and they're ready to go whenever those time frames come up.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Like I say, this is one of those pieces that really starts to really put me in the mindset. I think partly because we do it before every flight, but also because it just sounds super cool. I mean, as you can tell, it's pretty tight, but you wouldn't have included those explanatory comments, so it would have been like boom, boom, boom. This is frequencies. This is takeoff. This is, this is laser codes. This is whatever. And that whole part of it would be done in probably a minute.
Yep.
And I'm writing the whole time, and I have at this point, like a lot of people, I have a very standard format. For me, I take a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, fold it in half. I always put the other flights across the top. I've got format, and guys have at various times made sort of standard templates for people to use. And what I've discovered is that they're great as a starting point. Like you'll take someone else's, but I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody say, "Oh, I use Dirk's briefing format exactly." They'll say, "Oh, I took it and then I made it my own." And I don't even do that. I just have a blank piece of paper that I write on. But point is that there's a very structured, information-rich flow there that gets hopefully all, I guess,
that's the idea, right?
Right.
Yeah. You want to cover those things. So it's everything from your call sign, your radios, your check-in times, your takeoff times, all of that. And then even, some other basics on the flight, right? What is our expected operating altitudes? We're going to be en route and, egressing. We will be at, Angels 2-4 in and out, whereas on the target we're going to be operating Angel 16 block 20 something like that. So it starts to outline the profile for the individual pilots and, what's your alternate, right? I mean, that's one of the things that I know when I'm flying single player, especially if I'm just in a hurry, I'm not looking at what's my alternate airport, right? But these are things we definitely talk about, in our briefings. You know, what are the alternates? Because it might be for weather and might be for, you know, where do I go if I have battle damage? What's going to be closer? What's my green vector? What's my safe vector if suddenly I find myself either swamped by enemy aircraft coming in, or I've got damage to the aircraft and I need to get out of hostile airspace? What's the fastest way to get to a safe zone, right? So those are things that we try to cover in the briefing. Also any coordinating things, making sure that everybody knows specific time on targets for coordinating with other flights, what your AWACS call sign is, what tanker you're using, especially if there's multiple tankers. I mean, it's those sorts of things. And then obviously any code words, as you mentioned earlier, if you're a seed flight, for example, you may have a code word that you want to call out when certain threats are down. And so making sure everyone in the flight really understands what those are, in case anyone needs to take over for someone else that has either been taken out or suffered damage or things like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I have shown up for a flight, having signed up for the number 4 seat, and wound up leading it due to circumstances. Even though, you know, it goes 1, 3, 2, 4, we had that time. And I'm thinking of one particular time. Anyway, I wound up having to lead the flight because just the way things went down. So the flight briefing is super important because it gets everybody on the same page. It lets people, you know the plan so that if they need to, they can lead it, which sometimes you do.
Absolutely. Yep. And that's definitely something that, again, comes in with the whole multiplayer aspect, things that you don't think about when you're flying single player. It's I can't just come along for the ride. I've got to be engaged. And I really need to have this briefing, because guys have gotten caught off guard if they come into this. And let's face it, we all sometimes have those flights that, you know what, I just want to ride around in a number 4 seat. But you still need to at least jot some of these notes down. This is the bare minimums, because you may find yourself in a position where, wow, I need to, my other crew members or flight members have been incapacitated, or their aircraft has suffered damage, or heaven forbid they be shot down, and you're the only one left with munitions that can accomplish the goal of the flight. So it's and again, I think that for me goes back to the immersion factor that we keep coming back to. And it's even if I'm just looking for an escape after a long week at work and want to ride around in a number 4 seat, and just hang out with the guys, and enjoy spending time with them, I still need to at least be paying attention through the briefing enough that, should things happen in such a way, I can, I have the information at my fingertips to help me, fly the flight, or at the very least, survive the flight and bring the jet home.
Right. And that's, I think, one of the big advantages of having it be a standard is that, you know, when you're running through that list you were talking about, I know that you're going to say what air-to-air TACAN we're going to use and what Joker Bingo and who the data link host is. You know, exactly. I've got places for all of that. And so it's pretty obvious to me if something is missing, and I don't have to spend, you know, a lot of mental energy on capturing it because it's mostly the same.
It is standard. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Well, cool. So, you know, and that at that point we would say, okay, our flight is ready. You know, we're, I don't know, whatever, Viper flight. You would call, as the flight lead, you would call out on TeamSpeak and say Viper flight is ready to brief, meaning we're ready to do the next phase of the briefing, which is the pre-flight package level briefing. So let's talk our way through that.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, now that you know, whether it's 2 flights or 8 flights, we've all gone off and done our own little briefings. We've got all of our targets sorted internally. We typically just run through. There's usually some rhyme or reason to the sequence of our high-level briefing at the end here. A lot of times it may just be as simple as takeoff order, because that's the order you're going to hit your targets. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you may have a seed flight or a deed flight that needs to hit the area first and secure it. So we'll usually have them brief first, because then they're telling us, code words and their expected time on station and how much time they're giving themselves to accomplish their goal, things like that. So it influences the sequence that we end up doing the final briefing. But whatever that determination is, individual flight leads will come on and say, all right, we are this flight. This is our call sign. We're 4 aircraft. We're loaded out with this. Our takeoff time is this. Our expected time on station is this. Our task is, to accomplish whatever this is, whether it's securing surface to air, cap, striking, whatever. And from there, just covers some of the basics. May touch on verifying laser codes or code words that flight is going to use or provide to others, and then we move on to the next flight. And once we cycle through, asking for questions after each flight has been briefed, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Mission commander may give one last comment before committing to the pit and say, all right, everyone sounds like they understand what's going on. Remember, these are the important things. Here are your rules of engagement again. It's critical that you stay on station for 40 minutes or whatever else might be. And then individual flight leads will check with all of their flight members, making sure that they're ready. And they'll give the high sign that they're good to commit into the 3D world. And once that's done, who's ever hosting starts the campaign, and everybody begins proceeding into the pit based on their flight times. And it's kind of, for me anyway, that anticipation of committing into the 3D world really kind of builds up to that point, and now it's down to business and start running through your plan.
Yeah, it gets real busy after that in a good way, but it really does. And so I think that's why we brief, is because everybody that's ever flown the sim, at least other than to just like fly around, it knows that when the missiles start flying, when the munitions start flying, you maybe not overloaded, but you are loaded, right? Hopefully not overloaded, but sometimes that too. And so, that's when, right, off left. We agreed on that beforehand.
Right, exactly.
Is critical, rather than getting on the radio and going, should we go left or should we go right? Well, there's an SA-14 headed my way right now, so I might not have time to answer that question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important to have that plan. And it's, there's a lot of adages out there about, you fight like you plan like you fight, or fight to plan, and all those things. And really, it's designed to help you make those decisions somewhat automated once you're in the pit, because you've talked about them, like you said before, and it does lead to success, a much higher success rate. Those are things that we've seen. You and I have both seen that over the years that we've been flying together. Those missions that you say, this is going to be a piece of cake. We're not going to do much of a brief. Let's just hop in the pit. We'll go up. We'll hit this target. We'll come home.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. And it's because we didn't spend those 5 minutes with a pencil and paper and look at, hey, what were the threats that were there? Oh, we forgot to check the weather, and we brought laser guided munitions to a low overcast. That's not going to work. Yep. It's things like that you're just, that you didn't take the time to go through and didn't jot down, suddenly come back to bite you once you get into the heat of battle. So briefing is absolutely important. We try to run through it fairly quick. Like I said, 30, 45 minutes tops, hopefully, because let's face it, we don't have tons of time, and we do want to actually fly the jet. But that's why a lot of the guys, the mission makers, will put some of that briefing material out 3 to 4 days ahead of time, so you can go through, read through it, have a understanding, at least a good enough understanding that you can ask intelligent questions when you hit the briefing room. So that's, I think, really important, and it definitely contributes to success or not.
Yeah, totally. I think your point about how long it takes to go. We've probably spent roughly as much time discussing the briefing today as a typical one would take.
Yeah, absolutely.
all of which would be, I think, usefully employed time, right? Like every minute of that, except maybe you've checked in and now you gotta go refill your water before we take off. But like that,
right.
that half hour is, I think, a good half hour. And like you say, we could spend 8 hours, but, you know, I don't think most people with families or jobs or other distractions
right.
from the sim
Not
would be
on a
able to do
regular
that.
basis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But there are guys in our squadron, and then we know of other squadrons that will get together. I mean, they make it a long weekend, a guys retreat, if you will, and everybody gets together for LAN meets and things like that, where you will spend
Sure.
that kind of time prepping. But then again, you set that time aside, like you said. You're not competing with other family obligations and things like that, which is why we try to keep it on a regular basis, at least fairly compact, so that guys, and already it's, by the time you do the briefing, do the actual flight and a debrief, which I think we'll probably cover on a different podcast, that's probably about a 4-hour commitment.
Yeah, 3 or 4, yeah.
Yeah, good 3 to 4, because our flights typically are in the hour and a half, 2-hour range of actual flight time. Spend 45 minutes up front, another 30 minutes on the back end or so, and suddenly you're looking at 3 to 4 hours to actually get a mission going. So, and that's a big commitment for people, and we understand that. But we think that's I know certainly for myself, and I think I can speak for you as well. I mean, that's part of why we do this. We enjoy doing it. So it's just that we wish we could spend more time. And so the briefings and being prepared for that is all part of it.
Right. And it's like you say, or certainly as you're implying, that length of briefing is kind of optimum, right? In terms of, you're getting as much done as you can given the constraints. And I think I don't know, my experience has been it's pretty good. I think, my estimate of the success rate, if I just had to throw a dart at the wall, if you said tomorrow we're going to stop briefing, what impact do you think that would have on our ability to complete missions? It would go through the floor.
Oh, absolutely.
Through the floor.
Coordination would be gone. I mean, trying to do that in air, like you said, you wouldn't be able to do it because, that's great. You're telling me what you want me to do here on the approach to the target, but right now I'm getting overwhelmed by MiG-29, so
right.
Never mind.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yep.
So I think it's like, and again, you were totally right to put words in my mouth. It is absolutely time well spent.
Yep.
Well, cool. And I think you mentioned the debrief. That's also something, and you said we would do another podcast. Absolutely. We want to talk about that too.
Yeah.
That's another sort of central feature of the whole thing. Arguably more important than the briefing, although I don't know how you measure that kind of thing, but, we'll talk about that another day.
Certainly a good tool to measure how effective that briefing was.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And the briefing does come up in the debriefs, which again,
Absolutely.
we'll discuss. It's just too big a topic for right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, cool. I mean, and I think that's a pretty good overview. It's a half an hour. It's roughly the same every time. So I feel like we covered it. I think hopefully people understand why we think it's important. We certainly do.
Absolutely. And I think, thinking back to the comments we made at the beginning of this podcast, the tips that we pick up during the briefings that we do for multiplayer certainly can help you in your single player flights. I think it certainly adds to the realism and the immersion factor, and is one of the reasons why I've enjoyed doing online flying. And some of it has to do with the backstory that mission planners will make, but a lot of it has to do just with a good flight lead and how he or she will brief that flight and the detail that they go into, because not everybody we're not all equal at that, and it takes a while to really come up with that standard, what you want to accomplish, and be able to run through it. And there are guys out there certainly that are much better than I am, and some of them happen to be either retired or active flyers, military flyers, and I certainly enjoy any flight I get to make with them, because you get to see how the pros do it.
Yeah.
And it just helps me become better at that as well.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, I think flight lead is another thing that we could spend and will spend, I will venture to say, another entire show on. I'll just say at this point that it is a skill that we actively develop. Right?
Oh yes,
like that we focus on. But probably more about that some other time.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I don't know. That was pretty good. I mean, does that seem like a
I think it's a good place to wrap up.
Yeah.
And again, I think I've made this plea for in every one of these podcasts that if you're a BMS flyer and you're looking to do some multiplayer, go out, search for wings that seem to be a good fit for you. We'd love to have you come over to the 440th. We definitely are excited about the collaboration, coordination, multiplayer aspects. We're not just going out there to blow stuff up. We try to fly in a somewhat realistic manner, and if that's what you're looking for, we'd love to have you. And we are going to be doing something. We are actually talking about this earlier. We're going to start hosting some open flights on a regular basis. We haven't figured out the schedule yet, but if you want to come out and just check us out, we'll have a few things posted on what you'll need to know, just some sim specific things, and then some things to help you acclimate yourself real quickly to the multiplayer environment.
Right. And like we've said, I think every time, that's going to be great. We're looking forward to that, but also no need to wait. We're more than happy to have you swing by and say, hey, let's
Absolutely.
go sometime. You ping me, ping Zeus, ping Dirk, ping anybody. Really, all the guys are super willing to jump in and talk to you about what it's like. So anyway, www.440thvfw.com is the place to find us. Come on by.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. This has been the 440th VFW Podcast.